All right, today we're going to be talking about the Pacific War. Um, so here you're looking at the major timeline of the Pacific War. Uh, when Pearl Harbor happened, as we mentioned last time, the war with China, an all-out war with China, has been going on for 4 years. For 4 years, uh, the war with China came to a stalemate by the time when Pearl Harbor happened. The reason is because Japan simply did not have the military capabilities to control the part of China that they want to control. So if you look at this map, the pink areas are controlled by the Japanese occupation army, um, including all the coastal cities. But the rest of China are still under either the Chinese communist rule, especially in the northwest in this area, or it's under the Republican Chinese government rule. The Republican government's president is Chiang Kai-shek. He is in Chongqing. Yeah. Um, the Japanese occupation authorities is headquartered in Nanjing. That's the capital city of the Republic of China. So that's the situation. The stalemate lasted for almost 6 to 7 years since 1938, basically. Um, because China is too big. Manchuria alone needs 1 million Japanese imperial troops to guard, especially against Soviet Union, because Manchuria is close to Soviet Union. The Japanese put their best army, called the Kwantung Army, in Manchuria, together with 1 million Japanese immigrants in Manchuria. This military arrangement is meant to defend Manchuria as Japan's best sort of backyard against the Soviet Union. Because Soviet Union could attack. If you look at this map, this is easier to see. Manchuria is here. Okay, Manchuria is here. A very very important region for Imperial Japan. Japan got Manchuria since 1931, and since then Japan has been exploiting this region with its manpower and natural resources. But on the other hand, Japan has also to industrialize this region. The Manchukuo, or the Manchurian state, was established in 1932, ruled by a puppet ruler, China's last emperor Puyi. Japan is managing this place as sort of a huge garrison and backyard against the Soviet Union. Right? Japan's worry is that Soviet Union may attack Manchuria from north. Okay, if that happened, that would be a disaster. Right? So throughout World War II, Japan has been worrying about this possibility. This nightmare did happen. 2 days after American Air Force dropped atomic bombs on Japan. 2 days after that, it did happen. We're going to talk about this later. On the other hand, Japan controlled the eastern part of China since 1938. Okay, um, it's a stalemate. That means most of the time, the the Chinese side and the Japanese side, they would not move too much. They would not launch a major offensive. Okay, because they just don't have that capacity. Neither sides have the military capacities to launch a major attack on each other. So it came to a stalemate. Okay, but the situation only changed in 1944. We're going to talk about why that is so. That's only because the American use of Air Force strategy. Okay, so that's the situation in China. In China, okay. Well, to rule the part of China that Japan occupied, the Japanese occupation authorities, they tried to they found a they founded a Chinese puppet government, which is also called a Republic of China. It was ruled by a guy called Wang Jingwei. He used to be Chiang Kai-shek's right hand man. They used to be colleagues, but then in 1938 and 1939, when China was defeated by Japan, Wang Jingwei decided that he's gonna work with the Japanese. Okay, so he becomes something we call collaborator, a collaborator. The phenomenon of a collaborator is is very common in World War II, right? For example, in France, the under the puppet regime, the Vichy French government, there are a lot of French collaborators. Collaborators means Frenchmen who work with the invaders. They work with the Nazis. Same thing in China. Okay, in China there are a lot of collaborators like Wang Jingwei who worked with the Japanese occupation authorities. Right. When the Nazis invaded USSR, of course there are a lot of Russian, Ukrainian collaborators who chose to work with the Nazis because people have different motivations, right? They have different agendas. Some collaborators like Wang Jingwei, they believe that collaborating with the Japanese is the best way to help Chinese. Okay, they actually have their own logic. So a republican government was established by Japanese in China's eastern part to help to facilitate the Japanese occupation. For example, the Japanese local army would ask Wang Jingwei's Republican government, "Hey, we want resources. Okay, give us the resources we want. Okay, give us the manpower. We want 10,000 men to work on this public works project. Okay, give the resources to us." Okay, and Wang Jingwei's government cannot say no. So that's a typical collaborators puppet government. That's how Japan sort of rule the large areas they control. But there is one ideology. There is one ideology. Okay, if you look at this picture, picture was taken in after Pearl Harbor, when Japan has already controlled a vast area in the Asia Pacific region. Okay, the ideology behind the Japanese occupation is that uh, they say they want to create a great sphere of co-prosperity of East Asia. And in this great sphere, okay, all these Asian countries that Japan has invaded and occupied would unite together against the Western racism and the colonialism. Okay, the purpose is to turn against Western colonialism, white man colonialism. They want to kick out the Europeans, the British, the French. They want to kick out the British from Burma and India. They want to kick out the Frenchmen from Indochina, including Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. They did that actually. They want to kick out the Dutch from Indonesia, and they want to kick out, and they did, Americans from the Philippines. So they want to kick out these white men from all these East Asian countries. And for China, the idea is to help China to modernize. I mean, of course, this is propaganda. This is Japan, Imperial Japan's claim, right? The purpose is to help China to get rid of the Soviet Union's invasion or infiltration or influences. Okay, and at the same time fend China off American influences. So Japan would be the only foreign power that control China. Of course, this is Japan's own imperialism, right? This is Japan's own imperialism, and Japan itself um, has a very strong racist ideology for itself. For example, domestically, the imperial government is telling all Japanese people that we are the Yamato nation, and the Yamato nation is the most superior nation in the world. This is a form of ultra nationalism. Okay, through public education system, they're telling this message to their children every day, every month, every year, until it become a self-evident truth. All Japanese just believe that. They believe they're the best nation in the world. They believe they're the most happy nation, happiest nation under their emperor's rule. Okay, so that's how Japanese own racism and nationalism work out. Work out. Um, So when Japan occupied later, I mean after Pearl Harbor, when Japan occupied a huge area in the Pacific Asia region, they they're repeating this ideology. We are here to your country to help you kick out the white man and help you to liberate you from white man's racism, and we are here to help you modernize your country. So that's they repeated this propaganda again and again and again. Um, some Asian nations before Japanese came, they were suffering from some kind of a Western colonialism. Local, for example, the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese did not like the French, did not like the French colonial government. So when Japanese came to Vietnam in 1940, so some Vietnamese actually collaborated with Japanese. They thought, the Japanese came to help them. They really thought that they came to help them. For example, when the Japanese Imperial Army invaded Burma, Burma is also called Myanmar. It's one of the Southeast Asian country. It's here. If you look at this map, Burma is here. It's in between Southeast Asia and India. Uh, the Japanese Imperial Army they said to the Burmese, they say, "Hey, we're here to help you." Some Burmese nationalists, like a Bamo, one of them is called Bamo. He's a famous leader of the Burmese independence movement. Before Japanese come, uh, the Burmese nationalists, they have been fighting against British because British were the colonialists in Burma. So at first, the people like Bamo, they believed the Japanese. They thought they really came over to help them. But when Japanese really controlled Burma, uh, the local Burmese very quickly realized that the Japanese just are same. They're the same as the British. They're a foreign aggressors. They're a foreign colonialists that came over to take advantage of the local people. So very quickly, people like Bamo, they picked up a gun and started another war against Japanese invaders. So this picture was taken in Tokyo in 1942 to celebrate the so-called the Great Sphere of Co-Prosperity of East Asia, and and the Japanese government with their Prime Minister General Tojo sitting in the middle. Remember, General Tojo is the first military man who became Japanese Prime Minister, right? He has been the Prime Minister for most of the time during the war. And in this meeting, uh, Tokyo convened this conference and called all these local collaborator governments leaders all come to Tokyo to have this meeting. So this is truly this marked the the peak or the heyday of the Japanese Empire, right? For example, sitting to the left of General Tojo is Wang Jingwei, the Chinese collaborator who who's the leader of the Japanese puppet state in eastern China, right? Here, you can see all these Southeast Asian nationalists. They all chose to collaborate with the Japanese to modernize their country. I mean, their plan is to modernize their country, but of course, the war never gave them a chance to really build a new government. See on the right, you see these Indian guys. Remember, yeah, Japanese actually wanted to invade India. Okay, they planned that military operation, and the ultimate plan is to control India and then fight all the way north to perhaps to Central Asia, and perhaps to meet up with the Nazi army in Central Asia. So that's the plan for the Axis powers to control the whole world. And they were almost there. See all these are non-Japanese, right? These are non-Japanese. These are from Southeast Asia, from India, from China, from Korea, Vietnam, right? These leaders are all they all uh, they all announced that they are part of the so-called Great Sphere of Co-Prosperity of East Asia. So Japan's imperialistic ideology is working. It seems to be working in 1942. In 1942. All right, so back to this. To this. Okay, so last time we mentioned this tripartite pact that Japan signed with the fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Although there are a lot of conflicts and the mistrust within this alliance, but the three axial powers agree that they're gonna recognize each other's power or sphere of influence in and the new order in the West and East hemisphere. This means Japan is gonna recognize Nazi Germany's his power or his status of a hegemon in the Western hemisphere. Um, and then Nazi Germany would recognize Japan's status of a hegemon in the Eastern hemisphere, and they share the common enemy. Okay, Germany and Japan share the common enemy in Eurasia. Their common enemy is Soviet Union, and in the Western hemisphere, their common enemy is United States. So this 1940 tripartite pact is meant to it's meant to turn against the United States. Okay. There are some loose technological joint commission. There's one commission established, but the commission, uh, I mean, composed of the Japanese and the German officials, they didn't do too much. They didn't do too much. Okay. All right. So how do we know that Nazi Germany did not trust Japan that much? And by the same token, Japan also did not trust Nazi Germany that much during World War II. There are some examples. For example, um, in 1939, Japan tried to provoke Soviet Union. Okay, in the in China's okay, it's outside of this map actually. I'll show you a better map. Uh, in this area, near it's the border area between Mongolia, China, and the Soviet Union. In 1939, the Japanese already occupied Manchuria, right? In 1939, they provoked the Soviet Union's Red Army in this area. Okay, Mongolia has been this satellite state of the Soviet Union. So in 1939, in a place called Nomonhan in Mongolia, the Japanese attacked Soviet Red Army there. Okay, this is called the Battle of Nomonhan, 1939. Before World War II officially broke out in Europe, Japan already tried to provoke and test uh, Soviet Union's military capacity. Um, the Battle of Nomonhan ended with a total debacle, a defeat of Japan. Okay, the Red Army is much better equipped, much better industrialized army. So the Russian tanks totally crushed the Japanese footed soldiers and smaller lightweight tanks, light tanks. Okay, the Japanese tanks just cannot match the Russian Soviet tanks. And the commander of the Red Army at this battle is no one else but the later prominent um, Soviet military commander Zhukov. Zhukov later led the Red Army at Stalingrad and defeated Hitler's army. So, but before that happened in 1939, Zhukov already defeated the Japanese in Nomonhan in Mongolia. So after this defeat, uh, Tokyo had a discussion, actually a debate, because before this battle, some Japanese politicians they believe uh, their strategy should be northwards. That means they should have put their most of the military resources towards a northern expedition to attack Russia and take Siberia, and eventually perhaps meet the Nazi German army somewhere in European part of Russia. So that's the plan. We call this a northbound strategy. Okay, um, but some other Japanese politicians they believe that they should have put most of their military resources on a southbound expedition. That means they should bypass southern China and then attack Southeast Asia. They should attack Southeast Asia. But if they attack Southeast Asia using most of their military capacities, then inevitably they're gonna encounter all these Western powers. We're talking about it before 1940, okay? Because if you look at Southeast Asia, right? Vietnam, this is called a French Indochina. This area is called a French Indochina. French Indochina consists of the three modern countries: Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. This area is controlled by French. It's a French colony. Uh, and then Burma and then Malaya. Okay, well, it was called Malaya, but today it's called Malaysia. The Malaya Peninsula, including today's Singapore here, is controlled by the British. Okay, and then Philippines are colonized by the Americans, and then the Indonesian archipelago uh, archipelagos are controlled by the Dutch. So if Japan is going southbound, he's gonna have a war, direct conflict with European powers, okay, especially America, right? Because Japan had to take Philippines to control Southeast Asia and Indonesia, right? These are the two arguments. Okay, one argument is going north to attack Soviet Union. The other argument is going south to attack Southeast Asia. Okay, so these two groups of politicians have been debating in the 1930s. Okay, and even the emperor couldn't decide because both sides made a good argument. They say, hey, there are all kinds of benefits coming from my plan. Okay, so in 1939, when the Japanese provoked the Red Army in Nomonhan and got defeated, that put an end to the discussion. That put an end to this discussion. The debate is automatically ended. That means a lot of the Japanese politicians realize that we're not ready to attack Soviet Union. Soviet Union is just way too powerful. Okay, we cannot take it. We can't take it. So there's a total defeat of Japanese in Nomonhan. Yeah, there are several movies about this battle in Nomonhan. Quite interesting. In those movies pretty much faithfully represented the war when the Japanese launched a banzai charge at Russian tanks. Basically, it's a suicidal banzai charges. We know that in World War II, in those South Pacific islands, the Japanese sometimes launch a banzai charge at American GIs, and sometimes that worked, and that created a huge psychological kind of impact on the American soldiers. But in the North, when the Japanese did this to the Russians, it did not work out. It did not work out. They all got crushed down. So, so after the defeat at Nomonhan, no Japanese dared to mention the attack on Soviet Union. So, so in other words, they're traumatized. Japanese are traumatized after this battle. Even in 1942, when Hitler's German army was almost defeating, they almost defeated USSR. At that critical moment, during the Battle of Stalingrad, the Japanese still did not want to attack Soviet Union. So they missed their best opportunity to turn the tide of the war. I mean, in hindsight, historians know that Stalingrad truly is the turning point of World War II in the European theater, right? If Japan had helped Hitler in 1942 during the Battle of Stalingrad, the results of war in Europe could have been totally different. Okay, Soviet Union could have been totally crushed, but because of the earlier defeat that Japan suffered in Nomonhan in 1939, Japanese never thought of this idea. They missed their best opportunity. I mean, in hindsight, we know that they lost their best opportunity. So they decided that they're gonna turn south. Okay, the southbound strategy won the day after 1939. So 1 year later, I'm sorry. Let's talk about 1939 further. So after the defeat at Nomonhan, Japanese politicians they say we need to sign a non-aggression treaty with Russia. Okay, this happened in 1940. In spring 1940, roughly 1 year after the battle at Nomonhan. So Japan and USSR they signed a non-aggression treaty in 1940 spring. The treaty says neither sides are gonna attack each other. They're gonna maintain neutral no matter what happens in the other country. Okay, so 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 in other words, they promise peace to each other. Okay, they promise peace to each other. What's interesting is that Japan had kept this promise throughout the war. Even in 1942, after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, Japan, they kept this promise. They never attack Soviet Union. But in 1945, Soviet Union actually betrayed this. They basically they tore up this non-aggression pact in August 1945, and the Soviet Union Red Army invaded Manchuria, and Japan had no idea that Russia would do this. Okay, but of course, Stalin tore up this non-aggression pact with Japan, thanks to the agreement he signed with FDR and Winston Churchill. So that's the agreement the Allies made. But this is all behind Japan's back. Okay, so that's the situation. That's the situation. Um, well, 3 months after Japan and the USSR signed the Non-Aggression Pact, uh, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. That's the operation to attack Soviet Union. That's the largest military operation that ever happened in human history. Hitler immobilized more than 1 million troops to attack the Soviet Union. Okay, so if you look at the timing, this is very interesting. Okay, we know that Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan are supposed to be allies, right? But only 3 months after Japan and the Soviet Union signed the Non-Aggression Pact, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. That means Hitler did not think he needed Japan's help. Hitler still had this contempt on East Asian East Asian nations. He just doesn't believe that Japan can actually provide any substantial help. So it really doesn't matter. And also Japan also did not coordinate with the Nazis either, right? Because only 3 months before Hitler invaded Russia, Japan signed this non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. So neither side thought it was necessary to have a coordinated uh, military operation. This is also they failed. This is also they failed. A part of the reason they failed. So the actual powers they actually they don't really trust each other. They don't really trust each other. So this is a situation in 1940. I'm sorry. Actually, yeah, it's a situation in 1940. Actually, it's 1941. Actually, I'm sorry. I take it back. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. That was after Japan signed this non-aggression pact with the USSR. Okay, in 1940, Hitler was sweeping West Europe. He was sweeping West Europe, conquered the Netherlands, Belgium, and France almost, and bombed Britain. Japan took that chance to occupy French Indochina because French is weak. France was weak, right? The Vichy government couldn't say no to Japanese request to control Indochina. So the Japanese took Indochina in 1940. In 1940, and then in 1941, when Hitler invaded Soviet Union, Japan is preparing for larger military operation to take more land in in Southeast Asia. Well, the occupation of French Indochina provided Japan with a lot of resources. So in 1940, a lot of Japanese politicians thought they made the right decision. Okay, instead of going northbound, they made a decision to go southbound, and it turned out to be very profitable. Okay, they with a very minimal military cost, they gained a huge land in uh, in Southeast Asia, right? Vietnam provides a lot of manpower and natural resources. For example, rubber and then many other tin, right? Other metals. All these are important for Japan to launch further military offenses. Okay. Um, Now in 1941, in 1940 and 1941. The problem is America. It's when FDR saw Japan took Eastern China and then further took French into China, Americans got nervous, very nervous, because this is totally against the American interest in Asia Pacific. So Roosevelt sent a message to Japan saying, you have to withdraw from both China and French Indochina. Okay, otherwise there will be an oil embargo, and there will be a boycott against you. Okay, Japan certainly did not want to give up the regions they occupied with the military cost. So they said no to Americans. They said no to Americans. And then furthermore, they are preparing to attack the American Pacific Fleet stationed in Pearl Harbor. They want to destroy this fleet, or at least damage this fleet, so that the American Navy would not provide much support to Japan's military action in Southeast Asia. Well, there was a debate between Japanese Navy and Army. The Army said we wanna take over the entire Southeast Asia, including Thailand, Burma, Malaya, Indonesia, and perhaps to invade Australia, and also Philippines. Um, so the Army asked the Navy. They say, can we bypass the Philippines? Okay, can we not get into direct conflict with the United States? Can we just take all the land in Indochina, Malaysia, and Indonesia without attacking Philippines? But the Navy said, no, there's no way. We cannot. Okay, we have to take Philippines in order to better control the rest of the Southeast Asia. So eventually they decided that they're gonna take all these land uh, and also attack United States. Yeah, the idea Japanese at that time, lots of them thought America was weak, because if you listen to the jazz music, is very soft, right? It's all about the consumerism, individualism, leisure, right? Enjoy your time, right? They don't think Americans would have enough fighting power to really engage in the war. And also Roosevelt, in his presidential campaign, promised American people that he would not send any American young men to overseas to die, right? So that all these gave Japanese this message that Americans would not wholeheartedly participate in the war. As long as they got defeated in one or two battles, they're gonna back off. They're gonna back off. So that's the idea. Most of the Japanese generals that believe this, except for one. That is the naval admiral Yamamoto. Admiral Yamamoto, he knows a lot about the United States. He traveled in the United States, and this guy loves gambling. Legend has it that he won a lot of money in America by gambling. Later, he even bragged to his colleagues. He said, "If I had more time, I could have won more money in America, enough for us to build another aircraft carrier." Okay, that's what Admiral Yamamoto said. So before Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto was appointed to be the commander of the combined fleet that was going to attack Pearl Harbor. But Yamamoto did not like this job. He said to his colleagues, he said, America is more powerful than you can imagine. We should not attack America. Because, Admiral Yamamoto really is one of the few Japanese generals who really know America. He know that the huge industrial power in America would eventually overwhelm Japan. This is what happened in later World War II. Yamamoto is definitely right, but his colleagues did not listen to him. Okay, his colleagues just don't listen to him, um, and they asked Yamamoto to attack Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto, although personally he disagreed with this decision, but as a samurai soldier, he had to take the order. He had to obey the order. Okay, so he launched the attack on Pearl Harbor. What happened is widely known, so we're gonna skip this. So in December 1941, the Japanese combined fleet bombed Pearl Harbor, and that started the Pacific War. Okay, What happened after Pearl Harbor is actually more important to the world history and Japan, because Pearl Harbor is only a very small part of Japan's military operation in late 1941. Um, Most of the Japanese military operations happened in Southeast Asia right after Pearl Harbor. Right after Pearl Harbor, Japan started to take Hong Kong. Because at that time, Hong Kong, this Chinese coastal city, was under the British colonial rule. Okay, China, being when China was bullied by British, China had to give Hong Kong city to British. So, so during the first part of the war, um, Japanese cannot take Hong Kong. But now, after Pearl Harbor, Japan declared war. After the bombing, Japan declared war against United States, British, Britain, and other countries. So they took Hong Kong, and then they also very quickly controlled Thailand and Burma. Okay, the Thai king chose to collaborate with the Japanese because that seemed the only feasible and the wise thing to do. So the Thai king, there's a king in Thailand. He chose to work with the Japanese, and Japanese also invaded Burma, and there they defeated the British army. Okay, the Chinese also sent some army to British, but they were both defeated in 1942. In 1942, and then the Japanese were going down. They were going down all the way through Malaya. Okay, this is what happened in the months right after Pearl Harbor. Okay, very very important military operation. And at the same time, the Japanese Navy and the Army were attacking Philippines. Uh, the American General Douglas MacArthur was the commander of the American military force in Philippines. He gave up basically. He flew to Australia, leaving tens of thousands of his soldiers in Philippines to fight on their own. Of course, they were all eventually most of the American troops and the Filipino troops surrendered to the Japanese. This happened in the early part of 1942. In 1942, so by June 1942, Japan has controlled this whole large area. This is incredibly large area, from all the way from northern Sakhalin Island to the north of Hokkaido, including Manchuria. This is the northern boundary of the Japanese Empire in 1942, and then to the east. I'm sorry, to the west, they controlled China, part of China, and also controlled Burma, and they were preparing to invade India. So this is the eastern. This is the western. I'm sorry, this is the western boundary of Japan, of the Japanese Empire, and in the south, they controlled the entire Indonesia, and they were bombing the harbor of Darwin in Australia in preparation to attack Australia. And then in the east, they controlled half of Pacific Ocean because American Pacific Fleet was heavily damaged during Pearl Harbor attack. So yeah, so that's Pearl Harbor. Um, well, to a certain degree, the attack on Pearl Harbor is a turning point of is the beginning point of the Pacific War, but also a turning point of World War II in East Asia in general. Because when Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese leader, the Chinese resistance leader, heard about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, he was very excited. Well, he's not happy about American casualties. He's happy about Japanese made a very stupid decision to attack, to arouse this giant that is asleep. So so right after Pearl Harbor, Chiang Kai-shek saw uh, twilight. He saw hope. He saw the opportunity for China to finally win World War II. But without American joining the war, it would be very, very difficult for China to win the war because China was not industrialized. Okay, so really, Pearl Harbor is a turning point of World War II in East Asia. Okay. Okay, we gotta skip this. This slide is about Japan's ideology to overcome modernity. For some, okay, long story short, so for some Japanese, the war is one way for Japan to strengthen their Eastern spirit. It's a spiritual war. Okay, for Japan, it's a spiritual war. It's a war for Japanese native Japanese spirit to overcome all these shortcomings of a modernity, to overcome the contaminating, the corrupt, morally depraved Western culture. It's a cultural war. Okay? All right. So if you look at this picture, these Japanese soldiers, they're not riding mountain bikes for fun. Okay, they're riding mountain bikes to attack Singapore. Okay, in 1942, Japanese General Yamashita led two divisions of Japanese troops from Vietnam, and they were riding all the way down. They were riding mountain bikes. Yeah, for them it's probably fun, I guess. No, that was a joke. Okay, so the Japanese were riding mountain bicycles all the way down the Malayan Peninsula from Vietnam. Did you see that? Okay, this is Malaya, and their destination is Singapore City at the tip of the Malayan Peninsula. Okay, why Singapore City is so important? Well, Singapore is very strategically important because it's the it's located at a Malacca Strait, which connects the Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean. Okay, Indian Ocean is outside this map, but to the left of the strait, you can imagine the vast Indian Ocean, right? If you anyone wanna travel across, um, travel from Pacific Ocean to Indian Ocean or vice versa, you're gonna have to cross the Malacca Strait, and anyone who controls Singapore would control this strait. So it's a crucial. Okay, so the British they put it they had about 100,000 troops. Most of them were Indian British soldiers. They were guarding Singapore to defend the city. Uh, they put their cannon guns towards the sea. They thought the Japanese Navy is going to attack the city from the sea, but to their surprise, to the British surprise, Yamashita led uh, footed soldiers, not really footed, I mean, riding bicycle, bicycle riding soldiers, appearing from the jungle behind their defense line, and they took the city by surprise. They took the city by surprise. So General Yamashita, I mean, in terms of military tactics, is brilliant. Is absolutely brilliant. 1942. If you look at the this picture, it shows that this Japanese military officer with in a shabby military uniform, surrounded by uh, British troops. It looks like the this Japanese captain is a prisoner of war by the British, but that's not true. The truth is the opposite. Actually, in this moment of history, the more than 100,000 British troops surrendered to the Japanese. They all surrendered to Japanese General Yamashita. Okay, so this is the Battle of Singapore. Japan took Singapore, and again, in 1942, Japan defeated two other white man's empires. One is America, the other is British. So this is the third time that Japan defeated a Western power. Right, the first time is when Japan defeated Tsarist Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. We talked about this earlier. So 1942, this really marked the acme or peak of Imperial Japan. Okay. All right. So yeah. All right. So December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. That started the Pacific War. 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Nazi Germany and fascist Italy declared war on the United States. Why would they do this? A lot of historians may ask the question: Why would a Nazi Germany and a fascist Italy follow Japan in declaring war against the United States? Okay, well, they were prepared for this. Okay, Hitler himself also despised American military power. Uh, based on his experience in World War One, Hitler believed that United States would not, actively engaged in the war, and so did fascist Italy. So they declared war. Uh, all right, so January 1942, Manila uh, falls to Japanese troops, and American troops in Philippines surrendered to Japan. General MacArthur flew to Australia. He basically abandoned his troops. February 1942, Japan bombed Australia. They also controlled Java. Java is part of the Indonesia archipelago. And Dutch Eastern Indies belonged to Japan now. April 1942, Bataan Death March. Okay, what this means is that when Japan captured so many American troops, they forced the American and Filipino troops to move to a concentration camp on the other parts in the country. During the the trip, during the trip, American troops, American soldiers were, I mean, POWs were mistreated. Uh, at least 5,200 of them died on the march. This is called the Bataan Death March. There's some movies about this. So as you can see, based on the so-called samurai culture, the Japanese they treated POWs very, very badly. They did this in Nanjing in 1937, right, where they slaughtered more than 10,000, more than 100,000 actually, Chinese POWs. But now in Philippines, did the same thing to American POWs. Because according to the samurai culture, surrender is the most shameful thing you can do as a warrior. Even more shameful, even worse than death. Because most samurai, at the moment of being captured, they would rather kill themselves, commit seppuku, rather than surrender and being captured. So they see this as a shame to become a POW. And as a result, they treat other countries' POWs very, very badly. Very, very badly. Okay. Yeah. So throughout the war, they the the Japanese treated the POWs really badly. Most of the POWs would die in the concentration camp if they survived if they survived the capture itself. Most of the time the Japanese would just kill the POWs immediately. For example, American pilots, if after they bombed Japan, if they got shut down and if they got captured, many of them were beheaded immediately. Uh, okay, so but the United States were the United States was preparing for a counterstrike. The first counterstrike came at the so-called Doolittle bombing. Okay, the Doolittle bombing. Well, Doolittle bombing is happened right after several months after Pearl Harbor. This is basically a gesture that American Air Force and Navy to show Japanese that they're determined to fight. Okay, the this bombing did not result in substantial damage or casualties on Japan's side, but it's more like a gesture, more like an announcement to show Japanese that we're determined to fight you until the end of the war. Okay, the bombing was difficult because at that time the U.S. Air Force, I'm sorry, the U.S. Aircraft carriers could not get too close to Japanese island, okay, to the Japanese islands. So as a result, they have to send the bombers halfway on the way. And when the bombers fly to Japan, to Tokyo, and drop the bombs, they did not bring many bombs. They would not have enough fuel to come back, okay, because the aircraft carrier had to immediately return to Pearl Harbor to avoid Japanese naval attack. So those bombers, U.S. bombers, have to after they bombed Tokyo, they have to fly to eastern China and have some forced landing there. It's a very, very difficult military operation. Those American pilots who engaged in Doolittle bombing, uh, there are like more than 20 bombers. All of them had to force land in eastern China. Okay, some of them got killed in the forced landing, but most of them survived in eastern China. And there, American pilots were helped by Chinese guerrilla fighters. The guerrilla fighters they helped American pilots either to Chongqing, where Chiang Kai-shek's government is, or to other safe areas where they can go to India and then return back to the United States. So that's how Doolittle bombing was carried out. And the Japanese know that those American pilots landed in East Asia. I'm sorry, in East China. So the Japanese searched the Chinese villages. They're punishing every Chinese villagers who helped American villages. In some cases, they killed more than 100,000 Chinese just as a punishment for the local Chinese who helped American pilots. So it's a terrible, terrible war. Terrible war. Okay, so that's the Doolittle bombing. All right. The turning point of the Pacific War, as most historians agree, is Midway, the battle at Midway, where American Navy just miraculously bombed a couple of Japanese aircraft carriers. Those Japanese aircraft carriers that are sunken, that are sunk, are carried very experienced pilots and naval troops. So Japan lost a lot of seasoned commanders and pilots at Midway. And also during the battle, the Japanese thought it was an honor for it's a way to protect their honor to sink with the battleship. So the commander most of the time would sink together with the with the battleships. So as a result, this code of honor also made Japan lose a lot of their best and most experienced commanders. But on the American side, human lives are more important. So you can lose a battleship or any ship, doesn't matter. But most importantly is to rescue the personnel, to rescue the crew, so that you can keep on fighting on the next battleship. So that's how Japan is kept losing their experienced uh, military personnel. Okay, and then the war is dragging on for many more years in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, okay. Long story short, I'm gonna jump quickly. Okay, even before Pearl Harbor, there were already American pilots fighting in China. These boys are called the Flying Tigers. Who are they? Okay, well, before Pearl Harbor, uh, Chiang Kai-shek's government's air force, Chinese air force, was basically already destroyed by Japanese air force by 1939. So so the Chinese desperately wanted to rebuild their air force, but they don't have airplanes and they don't have trained pilots. So Chiang Kai-shek turned to Americans. Chiang Kai-shek had a friend, a retired American Air Force officer called Claire Chennault. General Chennault helped Chiang Kai-shek to hire mercenaries, these retired pilots from U.S. Air Force, and then they received pretty handsome salary from Chinese government. And then the Chinese government also purchased airplanes. Most of them are P-40 and P-41 the fighters. And then through India, the U.S. Airplanes and pilots arrived China. And even before Pearl Harbor, they were already flying in the sky of China. And of course, when after Pearl Harbor, these volunteers, yeah, they were called volunteers, officially rejoined the U.S. Air Force to fight American Air Force in China. And their performance is brilliant. Under the commandership of General Chennault, the so-called Flying Tigers, American volunteer fighters, they would shoot down 10 Japanese airplanes by losing only one of their own airplane. So that's a brilliant performance. Why they are called Flying Tigers? Well, that's because these American boys, they uh, painted their airplanes like sharks. Okay, but the hinterland Chinese, they never saw sharks. So local Chinese near the American Air Force bases, they thought these airplanes look like tigers. So so they called American pilots flying tigers. Okay, so so that's how the name came from. That's how the name came from. Okay, all right. So after Midway, after the victory at Midway, uh, the Japanese are losing every battle. Before Midway, they were winning. Before Midway, the Japanese are winning every battle in during the first half of 1942. But after Midway, they're losing every battle. In 1943 and 44, the British, American, and Chinese Allied force launched a counter strike in Burma. Okay, the battle in Burma is pretty difficult because it's a totally jungle. The American uh, General Joseph Stilwell. Let me pull up a picture of him. This is Stilwell. This is Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, this is Stilwell, and standing in the middle is Chiang Kai-shek's wife, uh, Maiden Song. Chiang Kai-shek's wife, her name is Song Mei-ling. Song Mei-ling graduated from American Liberal Arts College Wesleyan. So she speaks fluent English. She worked as a liaison or middleman between Chiang Kai-shek, her husband, and Americans during the war. Stilwell, his job is to train the Chinese troops in Burma, in Burma, in this part of Southeast Asia. Uh, the Americans equipped the Chinese army there in Burma, and they trained them with the American training and the equipment. The Chinese army performed much better. Okay, in Burma, and in 1944, they basically they drove all the Japanese out of Burma, and they tried to attack back into China, um, so there was the tide is reversed in Southeast Asia. Okay, so this is the battle in Burma. At the same time, in those the American Navy also is defeating Japanese Navy further and further in those in Southeast Asian in South China Sea. Okay, this is South China Sea. Um, but the problem is American military force just doesn't have the capacity to attack Japanese on all these islands. Japanese have their military presence on many of those islands, including all these islands in the Philippines. So General MacArthur made a decision to only take over the very important islands and gradually get close to the home islands in Japan. So this strategy is called island hopping strategy. That means Americans are going to bypass most of the islands in the South Pacific. Okay, they're going to just leave those Japanese troops on those islands for starving. Okay, because the Japanese Navy is destroyed. In that case, Japanese Navy just cannot provide enough supplies to their army in those islands. So those Japanese troops are not concerned. Americans are going to focus their resources on taking those islands that are strategically important. Eventually, they're going to get close to Japan so that they could build airports on those islands and bomb Japan. This is a very new strategy to win the war. It did not happen in human history, right? Because we know that in World War One, basically it's a footed soldiers fighting in trenches, right? You don't use only air force to bring another country to surrender, right? So Pacific War is a very strange war. It's the first war that is fought by mostly Air Force, Navy, or at least as importantly as Army to win a war, to win a war. So they're gonna. So MacArthur's strategy is to bypass most of the islands and only attack those islands that are strategically important, including Guadalcanal, and then Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Gradually, they got closer and closer to Japan. Um, when Iwo Jima was taken, uh, an air force was I'm sorry, a airport is built in Iwo Jima that allows Americans to bomb Japan directly from Iwo Jima. So Japan's fate is doomed when Iwo Jima was taken. Although Japanese fought very bravely in Iwo Jima and many other islands, but it did not turn the tide. It did not turn tide. There's a very interesting book called The Taste of War. Um, the Taste of War. You can do a Google search. This book tells a global history of food in World War II. Okay, and the argument of the book is that the result of World War II is determined on the kitchen table. That means which country can provide the most food to their soldiers would win the war. And it turned out that although Japanese Imperial Army was supported by the samurai culture, very loyal, very passionate, and they fight very bravely, very hard, but they simply don't have enough food. Okay, or they don't have a capacity to send the food to the front. Okay, when Japan lost the navy, it's important to impossible to send. It's impossible to send food to their soldiers guarding those islands. So Japan's fate is doomed when they cannot provide enough food to their soldiers. For example, in Iwo Jima, um, the local Japanese army pretty much is cut off of all their supplies. In the end, they had to eat whatever they can find on the island, any rodents, fish, or birds, or whatever. And then there's some even cannibalism within the Japanese army. But on the other hand, the American troops are much better provided with the food and equipments. If you look at the menu, the American GIs on their menu, their ice cream, chocolate, spam, all kinds of meat, veggies, fruits, everything sent from the homeland. So American logistical power guaranteed the victory. So that's the book. What the book is about. It's called The Taste of War. Very interesting book about World War II, and it provides you with a different perspective to look at the world, to look at the war, understand why a war was fought in the way it was, and why the Allies won the war. Okay, okay. So that's the fighting in South Pacific. All right. So what ended the war? Well, in high school, you probably learned that what ended the war is atomic bombs, right? Atomic bombs certainly played a very important role. But here we're gonna make a different argument. Okay, we're gonna make a different argument. We're gonna argue that atomic bomb probably was not as important as most Americans thought. Okay, the reason is the following. Okay, well, let's talk about the atomic bomb. So, of course, the Manhattan Project was carried out secretly in New Mexico. Americans are moving ahead of Nazi Germany in terms of uh, building atomic bombs. All these are public history that is widely known. Widely known, yeah. Of course, in the Manhattan Project, there are some scientists who are concerned with the casualties of civilians, right? Because if you drop the bomb, it will cause a lot of civilians' death or casualties. So a lot of scientists they're nervous about that. So one suggestion is to invite some Japanese military officers to the desert of New Mexico and have them witness the explosion of atomic bomb. The idea is that if the Japanese saw how powerful the new weapon is, maybe they would surrender without fighting. Okay, but this suggestion was quickly turned down because atomic bomb as a new technology is very unreliable. Okay, what if we invite Japanese military officers to New Mexico and have an experiment, and then experiment? What if the experiment did not work out? What if the bomb did not explode? Okay, and then the Japanese military officers would laugh it off and return and keep on fighting, right? So that suggestion was turned. Actually, the bomb that was dropped on uh, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the second and the third bomb that was ever made. So it did not go through a lot of experiments, but it was dropped. So this happened in August 1945. Why the atomic bombs are not that important? Okay, we're not to say the atomic bombs are not powerful. It was powerful and very, actually, it's horrific. It killed tens of thousands of people immediately on the site. And then it killed even more people by radiation contamination afterwards. Okay, Japan is the only country that suffered this kind of attack. But before before the dropping of atomic bombs, Japan has suffered a lot of Air Force bombing. Okay, this happened in 1944 when Iwo Jima was taken. Okay, when Iwo Jima was taken, um, for more than 1 year, more than 60 Japanese cities have already been destroyed by U.S. air raids. This is before uh, Hiroshima. This is before the atomic bomb. And for example, in February 1945, there was a huge bombing of Tokyo. Okay, this is almost a half a year before atomic bomb. Um, when when the air raid on Tokyo was happening, the American Air Force General Curtis Lee May, he sent more than 3,000 B-29 bombers, the most advanced and the biggest U.S. bombers, to bomb the city at nighttime, and they dropped tons and tons of firebombs. Firebombs. Those firebombs are specifically designed for Japanese wooden architecture to set fire on the city. On that night alone, this is the bombing of Tokyo, February 1945. Um, on one night, if you look at the Japanese records, it's horrific, it's horrible. The whole city was turning to inferno, like a hell. It's burning, literally burning like a hell. The 300 B-29 bombers dropped so many bombs that the the fire and the explosion created a huge fire column in the middle of the city that is several hundred meters high into the sky, and the American bombers had to bypass the huge fire column growing from the ground to survive the bombing themselves, and the whole city of Tokyo was so hot that people were jumping into the river nearby the city until even the river become boiling hot and people were killed by the heat in the river. So that's how horrible non-atomic attack, a non-atomic bomb attack could be. Okay, and on that night alone, more than 100,000 Japanese got killed. This is February 1945, but they still did not surrender. Okay, they still did not surrender, and they suffered a similar kind of attack on almost all other Japanese cities. More than 60 Japanese cities are totally destroyed by U.S. air raids, but they still did not surrender. Okay, they still did not surrender. So uh, in August 1945, when two atomic bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, killing I don't know in Nagasaki, it killed less people immediately. So in other words, the Japanese people government they were already used to this kind of casualties. Okay, they were already used to this kind of casualties. This horrific bomb did not scare them. Okay, at first, um, what really worked as the last straw on the camel is Soviet Union invasion of Manchuria 2 days after atomic bomb attack. Okay, so even after atomic bomb attack, some Japanese generals they suggested that you know what, if the Americans they're dropping more atomic bombs, doesn't matter. We can move our capital to Manchuria, to Changchun City in Manchuria. Okay, because Japanese have been there for many years since 1931, right? It has been there for at least 14 years. It has been industrialized. A lot of garrisons built there. There are 1 million Japanese Kwantung Army there, together with at least 1 million Japanese immigrants, plus many more Chinese who have been under Japanese rule for 14 years. So they're trustworthy. So the idea is that they move the capital from Tokyo to Manchuria and keep on fighting for many years. In that way, there would be many more Americans die in the war before Japan could surrender. Okay, so they don't care. They're not that afraid of atomic bombs. But 2 days later, the Red Army, um, the Red Army just won the war in Europe in May 1945. In 3 months, most of the Red Army troops were transported to the Far East through the railway in Siberia. Stalin kept his promise to Roosevelt and Churchill. The promise is that 3 months, no later than 3 months after the war ended in Europe, Soviet Union is going to join the Pacific War. Okay, Stalin kept his promise. So in August, in August 1945, exactly 3 months after the war ended in Europe, Stalin's Red Army attacked Manchuria, and within days they crushed the Kwantung Army. The best divisions of Kwantung Army was already redeployed to Southeast Asia, to South Pacific, and most of them got killed by Americans there already. So what's left in Manchuria are not their best, are not Japan's best troops. So they got crushed by Red Army, by war-hardened Red Army. Right, those Red Army soldiers just experienced the European War. Right, so they came over when they came over to Manchuria, they defeated the Japanese very easily. Okay, um, so that's the situation. So really, the invasion into Manchuria by Red Army is the last straw on the back of the camel. Okay, it really smashed Japan's last hope to continue fighting the war. Okay, uh, even after that, there are some hardcore Japanese militarists who try to kidnap the emperor to stop the emperor from announcing surrender. Okay, they want to keep on fighting until last man, literally on last man. They just don't want to surrender, okay, because of the samurai culture. So this is samurai military spirit, is a double-edged sword, right? It could make their soldiers fight really hard, but on the other hand, it could have dragged Japan down into a hopeless fighting with a meaningless sacrifice of their civilians, right? So this is a double-edged sword. All right. So in August, uh, after atomic bombs, after Soviet invasion of Manchuria, the emperor the emperor decided that, okay, we're gonna surrender. We're gonna surrender. Okay. Well, this is Hiroshima looks like after being uh, attacked by atomic bomb. Okay. So eventually, the emperor announced surrender in 15 August 15th. Okay, he made an announcement through radio, and that was the first time for many Japanese to hear the voice of their own emperor, the first time in their life, and it was bad news. The bad news is Japan surrendered. Okay, uh, according to Japanese tradition, ordinary people, commoners, just cannot see the emperor. And our emperor is not easily uh, being seen. So, and the Japanese called their emperor's voice the Jade Voice. They heard the Jade Voice first time on August 15th, 1945. Terrible news. A lot of Japanese are crying. Some of them committed suicide for the guilt of not protecting their country. But other East Asian countries are celebrating. Okay. By the way, this is an unconditional surrender ceremony um, uh, that happened on USS Missouri. Uh, both sides, the Allies and the Japanese government, signed the documents of unconditional surrender. What does unconditional surrender mean? Okay, well, in 1944, a lot of Japanese already know that they're losing the war. There's no way to win the war. And they're trying to negotiate a surrender or an armistice. Okay, they try to negotiate a armistice that is favorable to Japan. They even try to find help from Soviet Union for that purpose. Of course, Stalin would not really help the Japanese. Right? In 1945, the major concern for Japanese is their emperor. It's okay for Japanese to disarm their millions of armies. Okay, that's fine. But the problem is they want to keep their emperor. And but the Allies in 1945 kept sending a message to Tokyo saying, if you want to stop the war, there's only one way. That is your unconditional surrender. That means we can do anything on you. Okay. But the Japanese, they're afraid that the Allies would remove their emperor because according to the Meiji Constitution, the emperor has the supreme power, and the emperor is the sovereignty of the Japanese nation. So that means he's gonna be responsible for the war. Okay, so if the Allies would pursue war crimes, okay, then the emperor could be responsible for that. He could be imprisoned. He could be removed. So this is why the Japanese did not want to accept an unconditional surrender until August. So really, the war could have already ended much earlier. Millions of people's lives could have been saved, but this Japanese concern really made them keep on fighting for many more months until they really cannot take it anymore. Okay, so unconditional surrender. There it is. Japan's East Asian neighbors, if we look at the map, they were all celebrating the victory. Okay, Kwantung Army in Manchuria was crashed, and then Manchuria was given back to Chinese. Taiwan was given back to Chinese. Yeah, we mentioned this before. War, the Japan's colonial rule and the war really created an ambiguous identity for the Taiwanese, right? During the war, the Taiwanese were told you're Japanese, we're losing the war, the Americans are bullying us, so we're losing the war. But in August 1945, all of a sudden, when the Chinese took back Taiwan, they told the Taiwanese, we won the war. So Taiwanese, we lost the war yesterday, now we won the war today. So what really is happening? So war really is creating an ambiguous identity for the Taiwanese. Koreans are happy, okay, because they finally gained independence. According to the agreement by the Allies, Korea is gonna be given independence, okay. But the problem is, the Soviet Red Army is occupying Manchuria, and according to the agreement between Stalin and Roosevelt, um, the the Americans and the Russians are gonna split their occupation of Korea. Okay, and the boundary is the 38th parallel. The 38th parallel is an imaginary line drawn on the Earth. Okay, 38th parallel. So according to the agreement, the Red Army is going to occupy northern part of Korea, to north of the 38th parallel, and the Americans are gonna occupy the southern part. So in the years right after war, both powers supported uh, a government uh, sort of loyal to themselves. For example, Stalin, he picked up a Korean guy called Kim Il Sung. Kim Il Sung is a North Korean communist. During World War II, he was fighting against the Japanese in China's Manchuria. When those guerrilla groups got defeated, Kim Il Sung retreated back to Siberia. Okay, so most of the time during the war, Kim Il Sung, the Korean communist, was in Siberia. Okay, and then in 1945, the Russians helped Kim Il Sung return back to his own country, and he established a new government in North Korea. In the South, the Americans also supported a Princeton University graduate, so he clearly is educated by Americans. Another Korean, a guy to be the president of the Republic of Korea in the South. So there are two governments. There are two governments supported by two powers. In 1950, eventually, the North Korean government, led by Kim Il Sung, decided that they're gonna unify the peninsula. Okay, so in June 1950, the North Korean communists they launched Korean War. They attacked the South. Okay, with the help from Soviet Union and the new China, new communist China that was established in 1949. The North Korean army invaded the South, and that started the Korean War. It lasted for 3 years, resulting in millions of deaths. Okay, in China, all right, the Chinese are very happy in August of 1945 because after 8 years of fighting, they finally won the war. Okay, they finally won the war. But peace did not come because there are also two political forces in China. There were communists in northern China, and there are nationalists led by Chiang Kai shek in southwest China. So, almost immediately after Japan surrendered, after World War II ended, uh, the two parties, the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party, they started a civil war in 1946. And the civil war lasted for another 3 years in China, resulting in millions of deaths until the communists won. So here I want to mention one thing about Japan's role in in re in remapping East Asia. Okay, before World War II, the Chinese communists were almost exterminated by Chiang Kai-shek, and they had to run, they had to escape from Chiang Kai-shek's army until they arrived at a remote and poor borderland province, borderland town called Yan'an in here in China. They were almost kicked out of China, the communists. Okay, but the Japanese invasion of China in 1937 totally changed Chinese political landscape. Okay, when Japanese invaded China, a lot of Chinese are saying we should stop the civil war between the nationalists and the communists. Okay, so this is why Chiang Kai-shek stopped the attack on the communists. So to a certain degree, the Japanese really saved Chinese communists, and the Chinese communist leader is someone called Mao Zedong. He's known as Chairman Mao, chairman because he's always the chairman. So Mao Zedong truly was saved by Japanese Imperial Army. What's interesting is that when in 1970, in the 1970s, when the Japanese Prime Minister Tanaka visited Beijing, he met with Mao, and the Japanese Prime Minister apologized to Mao Zedong. They say the invasion of China by the Japanese Imperial Army uh, brought a lot of uh, casualties on the Chinese side. We apologize for this invasion. Okay, we apologize. But Chairman Mao says, no, 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 you don't have to apologize. We thank you. We thank you for invading China. Without your invasion, we communists would never succeed. Okay, and Mao Zedong said this sincerely. He said this a couple of times in many different occasions. So he was not joking. He was definitely not joking. He was serious. So so in other words, if you look at East Asia, Japanese invasion of all these East Asian countries gave communism a great chance to rise. So this is one of the ironies of history. Without Japanese invasion, Kim Il Sung, the North Korean communists, would not have controlled North Korea. Without Japanese invasion, the Red Army, the Soviets, would never control would never control Manchuria, and they would not control North Korea. Okay, and then that means communism would not have spread in North Korea. For the same reason, without Japanese invasion, the Chinese communists would not have an opportunity to rise again during the war and then win the civil war against Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, so between 1946 and 1949, the Chinese Civil War lasted for 3 years until the communists won. Okay, the communists got a lot of support from the from Soviets in Manchuria. The first battle of the Chinese Civil War actually broke out in Manchuria, and there recent studies have shown that the Chinese communists they hired a lot of surrendered Japanese military officers, more than 20,000 of them. More than 20,000 Japanese military officers got hired by Chinese communists in Manchuria, and that they helped Chinese communists, they helped Mao Zedong to win the civil war, the battle in Manchuria. Very, very important. Very, very important, actually. Actually, some Japanese military officers, after later they returned back to Japan, and periodically they would commemorate this experience, their experience in Chinese Civil War after World War II, and they would say, "Hey, during World War II, you know what? Yeah, we beat Chiang Kai-shek's army, and then after World War II, we beat them up again." we we beat them up again on the communist side. So that's something interesting. Okay, after the Soviet Union occupied Manchuria, the 1 million Japanese immigrants had to return back to Japan, and then one word about the Chinese Civil War. In 1949, the communists won the Civil War. The Chinese nationalists had to flee to Taiwan. And remember, they just took Taiwan back a few years earlier, okay, in 1945. But now in 1949, 4 years later, Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan. And the Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government has been in Taiwan after that. Of course, in 1980s and 90s, Taiwan experienced a pro-democratic movement. So right now, Taiwan is a democratic country. Right now, the ruling party is the Taiwanese local party, but Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist party is still there. It's still there in Taiwan. So this is why there are two governments in China. One is called PRC, People's Republic of China. The other government is called the ROC, Republic of China. So two Chinese governments, and this is the result of Japanese invasion of China. It is all the result of World War II. So really, the expansion of Japanese empire had long-lasting impact on almost all these East Asian countries. Okay. Of course, the Red Army withdrew from Manchuria later, and they gave Manchuria back to Chinese communists. So right now, Manchuria is part of China. Okay, if you look at Vietnam, similar things happened. Okay, we all know the guy called Ho Chi Minh, right? Ho Chi Minh was the Vietnamese communist leader who led the Viet Cong, or the Vietnamese Communist Army in North Vietnam during the whole Vietnam War. So this is why he's known for Americans. But Ho Chi Minh was already a famous leader of a Vietnamese nationalist militia during World War II. He fought against the Japanese for many years since 1940. Okay, so in 1945, when Japanese surrendered, the emperor sent an order to all the Japanese armies in East Asia, including the Japanese army in Vietnam. So when the Japanese put down their weapon and returned back home, they left a vacuum in Vietnam. The French returned. Okay, the French said, "Hey, Vietnam is our colony." So in 1945, when Japanese retreated from Vietnam, the French came back again. They say, "We want to continue our colonial rule in Vietnam," but Ho Chi Minh and his followers did not agree. Okay, so immediately in Vietnam, after Japan surrendered, another war broke out between the Vietnamese nationalists and communists, and on one side, and the French colonists on the other side. In the 1950s, the French were defeated in Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh won this war, and again, Vietnam, just like Korea, was divided into two parts according to the seventh parallel. The northern part of Vietnam was controlled by the communists under Ho Chi Minh's leadership. The southern part was a pro-West government. So this is the origin of the Vietnam War, and this all has to do with the Japanese invasion to all these East Asian countries. Okay, so the two Vietnamese governments are the results, are the origin of a Vietnam War, just like a Korean War. Very, very similar, actually, very similar. Yeah, in the 1960s, when the Northern Vietnamese government tried to unify their own country, war broke out, and the Americans chose to support the southern side. Okay, they kept on fighting until 1975, when Americans finally decided that they're going to give up, and they withdrew from southern Vietnam, and immediately the Northern Vietnamese Communist Army unified the country in 1975. So that's the Vietnam War. All right. A similar thing happened in Korea, except that in the Korean War lasted for 3 years from 1950 to 1953. And it came to a stalemate. Okay, the Americans did not lose the war. They had a tie with the North Korea and Chinese who came to North Korea to help with the Kim Il Sung's regime. Okay, so even today there are two Korean governments: North Korea and South Korea. Okay? And the 30th parallel is a non-militarized zone. Non-militarized zone. That means officially it's still a war zone. Officially, it's still a war zone. There's still a lot of landmines there, and nobody can cross. Nobody can cross. Okay, and North Korea and South Korea are still separated. Separated. It's not unified. So that's the long-term impact of Japan's invasion uh, to its East Asian neighbors. To its East Asian neighbors. Okay. So, oh yeah, here. Actually, yeah, here we have a photo. This is this is uh, Prime Minister Tanaka. Japanese Prime Minister Tanaka visited Beijing and he met Mao in 1972. He apologized to Mao, but Mao said, "No need to apologize. We thank you. We are grateful for Imperial Army, for Japanese Imperial Army that invaded China." So yeah, that's the funny moments of history. All right, so this will end up our discussion on the Pacific War. Uh, and next time, we're going to be talking about post war Japan.